Hello there, and welcome to today's webcast, Funding GovTech, Understanding Total Cost of Ownership. This is the third installment in our series, exploring the funding of GovTech. I'm Justin Marlow, a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government and a professor at the University of Chicago, and I'm excited to serve as the host for today's webcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next 30 minutes. You see a few housekeeping notes that I want to mention real quickly before we get started here today. Recording of this presentation will be sent to all registrants within the next 48 hours. Be sure to participate in the Q&A. You see the Q&A box at the bottom left of the presentation panel. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can toward the time that we have at the end of our discussion today. If you'd like a copy of the slides, be sure to click on the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. We encourage you to complete a brief survey at the end of this webinar. We'd like to hear what you have to think. If you're unable to stay with us for the entire webinar, but would like to complete the survey as much as you're able, be sure to click on the survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch that survey. Otherwise, it will pop up once the webinar concludes. And again, we encourage you to disable pop-up blockers, and if you have any media issues or any other technical problems, be sure to click the help button at the bottom of the console. So with that, let me get to introducing our speakers. I'm really pleased to be joined today by two excellent presenters who are going to tell us everything we would need to know in a half hour about the total cost of ownership. We're joined first by Michael Leahy, who is the Chief Information Officer for the state of Maryland. In that role, he's responsible for information technology, data processing, telecommunications and systems procurement, planning and management for the executive branch of state government. And we're also fortunate to have with us Travis Cutright, who is the Chief Information Officer at the city of Mesa, Arizona. Travis is a service-oriented executive with expertise in establishing and driving strategic direction, enhancing organizational value, and steering continuous improvement. Over the past 25 years, he's served in executive roles in the capacity of Chief Information Officer, Director of Information Technology, as well as Vice President and Regional Business Manager in both the public and the private sectors. He has a master's degree in public management from Northern Arizona University, as well as a bachelor's degree in business administration. He has an executive certificate in public leadership from Harvard at the Kennedy School of Government, and is also an active member of the International City-County Management Association. Welcome to both Travis and to Michael.
Thanks.
So before we get started, thank you. Glad to have you. Glad to have you. So before we get started with the conversation among the three of us, we wanted to put a quick poll out to the audience, just to set the stage and help you to think a little bit about some of the issues that we hope to explore in our conversation today. And so that poll question for all of you is, what are your greatest challenges in developing an understanding of the total cost of ownership? Obviously, our theme is total cost of ownership, and we're going to be talking about some of the technical, procedural, policy, and even political challenges that surround understanding and communicating total cost of ownership. So in thinking about the greatest challenges you, the audience, face in developing an understanding of total cost of ownership, what comes to mind? One, working with the budget and finance organization to develop a total cost of ownership. Two, developing a multi-year funding strategy. Three, tracking related costs like personnel, facilities, and other overhead. Or four, estimating costs for the future. So lots of different ways of thinking about these challenges. Again, some internal, working across departmental lines, working with the budget and finance shop, thinking in terms of a multi-year funding strategy, obviously very important for some of the types of contracts and structuring of the kinds of deals that we have to talk about, tracking related costs, and estimating costs for the future. So it looks like, based on our participation so far, we'll give it another second for everyone to participate, but it looks like so far, working with the budget and finance organization seems to be the majority, with developing a multi-year funding strategy coming in second. So perhaps no surprise there that one of the challenges is working within the organization as much as it is costing out or thinking about the implementation of some of these systems. So very interesting feedback, and glad to hear that, because we will be talking about exactly those questions as we go. So thanks everyone for taking the time to chime in on that. Okay, so to get to some of the issues that we want to get to, we have a couple questions that we want to throw around here as a panel, and then, as mentioned, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A with all of you. So again, don't hesitate to share your questions and answers throughout, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Our first question, and I want to start with Mike on this, is just to kind of set the landscape here a little bit. When you think about the biggest challenges that you face in managing the technology total cost of ownership, you think about that broad landscape of kind of overall challenges, what comes to mind for you right away?
Well, thanks, Justin. I think it's like the story of the blind man touching different parts of an elephant. It depends on which piece you're focused on any particular day. But as you noted, developing or just defining what is part of the IT costs is probably the most critical step. And then, of course, recognizing that unless you have a very advanced enterprise, most systems are still federated, there is considerable overlap and definition within each of the agencies. So one agency may consider something an administrative cost, another may consider it an IT cost. And then finally, the procurement process in government is such that we're attempting to take every possible step to make certain that we're fulfilling a fiduciary duty to the citizens and the taxpayers. And technology tends to move far more quickly. So even in establishing a budget within a particular year for operations or longer term innovation budgets, the technology changes so quickly that anything that's more than 2 years out is likely going to have to be revised before you actually start.
Interesting. So yeah, what we just defining the problem first and foremost and coming to some common understanding about how to even talk about the problem seems to be a big challenge in and of itself. Very interesting. Travis, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that Michael hit the points, but and I'm trying not to bleed into what the next question may be, but I think really helping our peers and leadership understand the total cost of ownership is, well, that there is a total cost of ownership is a challenge, right? When different business units and our departments go out and procure a software tool, they think that it's just the cost of that tool and don't consider everything else that goes along behind it, and supporting that tool and so it's an art to be able to have the relationship with them and communicate the total cost of ownership. It's more than just the initial capital outlay.
Definitely. Well, Travis, you mentioned communication. Let's maybe talk about that in a bit more detail. Obviously, as we saw from the poll question, one of the biggest challenges is just being able to work with the budgeting and finance folks or to coordinate within the organization. Communication is obviously a very important part of that. Do you see any trends out there for how to do that communication effectively, particularly around total cost of ownership?
Well, I will talk about the approach that I take, and so what I do is when we have a a business solution that's brought forward, I'll sit down with the leadership, so that's the OMB and also our city manager, and explain. And an example would be with the CARES money and this ARPA money. You know, we get it, and here's some free money to go out and do great things, you know, for our citizens. And I always remind not only the city manager but my staff, because our internal staff also don't always consider the implications of bringing a solution in. And I'm like, you know, there are operating cost implications related to this also. And so I'll sit down with the city manager and explain to them, you know, that so we've got the investment in software and hardware, and then there's implementation cost, right? And then there's data migration that needs to be considered. And have you thought about user licenses, because we pay annually for that, and that affects the operating budget and training. You know, there's the interface cost, and God forbid you get into customization, and then that's just a rabbit hole that explodes uncontrollably. And so you've got your software maintenance, patches, user licenses. So these are just conversations that need to happen on the front end before an organization makes those investments, or at least understand it. And I know my city manager appreciates that, because that is not what folks are generally thinking about when they want to bring in a tool or expend some capital. And so that's my approach, is just being transparent up front on what the total cost of this solution actually is, and then we make a decision on whether or not we'll do the cost benefit analysis at that point.
Definitely, yeah. So a lot of it clearly is having that conversation, but also being prepared to have that conversation, having thought through all of that in advance, for sure.
Right.
Yes. Easier said than done, I'm sure. Mike, anything to add on communication?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have, over the last several years, implemented a process that is rather different than, you know, what we started with. First, we have moved the budget modeling and costing from the budget office giving an agency IT and just giving us money. Unfortunately, under a model like that, if there's no direct cost to them, demand is unlimited. So we've implemented a chargeback model and a showback model. And in that same vein, in terms of the communication, we've done two things that I think have made a huge difference. We are really attempting to build a partnership with these agencies, that they don't see us as the geeks in the back room that have lights and Jacob's ladders and things of that sort. So instead of reviewing a particular solution that an agency would bring to us, I have set things up that they don't bring us a solution, they bring us a problem. And
Right.
We together talk about their business processes, their needs, their workflows, and what tools the state may already have, because we would have a better insight into that than they would. And if not, what are the possibilities for procurement? And then to follow up on that, we've created what we call the portfolio office, where the governor has, under the chief of staff, 4 deputy chiefs of staff, each of which is responsible for a number of the executive agencies. And we have a business relationship manager that is also responsible for those agencies specifically, and to that deputy chief of staff to serve as a subject matter expert and a communications point if there are things not going well within the day-to-day process. And, you know, amongst those 3 changes, we've seen a huge improvement in relationships and in building trust and transparency, as Travis said.
Interesting. So serving more as a consultant first than a than getting right to questions about cost. Very interesting.
Absolutely.
So when talking about financial models a little bit, we've hinted, I think, so far at some of the components of what a financial model might look like. Obviously, understanding all of those input costs. What you were just saying, Mike, clearly part of this is understanding if there's opportunities to repurpose or to extend capacity that's already in place. And sometimes that financial model may include chargebacks or thinking of what you do in terms of a kind of an internal service center rather than being a direct cost to particular agencies. All these are different, potential components of what we might call a financial model. Can you think of, let me start with Mike on this one. Can you think of other maybe examples or other interesting financial models that you've seen that can help governments to really get their arms around this question of what is total cost of ownership?
Certainly. We spent a great deal of time thinking about this, and we have implemented a methodology called TBM, Technology Business Management, that deals with not only, as Travis said, the capitalization costs, but the operating and the ancillary costs that go with any complex organization. It has taken us about 2 years to get it up and running, but effectively, we build our cost models in such a way that it is very transparent. The agencies can see exactly what they're spending on services, exactly where we are in innovative product building for them, so the major project range, and what the transitional costs will be to move it into operation and then to maintain operations. And that has been a godsend. The other aspect of that that we touched on very briefly was, you can use either chargeback models or just non-budgetary, tell us what you need and the budget people will figure out how to spend that money. Have found that the chargeback modeling is far more difficult to implement, but actually gives people significant cause to think about what they're spending. So in that sense, it's been a great tool. And then finally, one of the things that we've given a great deal of thought to here in Maryland is that typically when one thinks about IT, cybersecurity and now privacy and a number of these other ephemeral issues that can have a massive impact on your operations aren't easy to determine. You never know when a breach is going to occur. So we have started building some quantitative risk management models where we actually get the folks in the agencies to tell us what risks are acceptable at what price point, and then agree on a plan to mitigate particular risks that occur, and hopefully to build into our modernization plans a way to remove those risks completely without additional significant cost. And those are the costs that I think destroy a budget. The unforeseen things that these days we look at as ransomware, cyber risk, or network access going down. I'll give you a very simple example. Many of the telecoms still run network through either T1s or copper, and they're all moving to Ethernet. Well, most states haven't put that into their budget, but in a state like Maryland, we know over the next 5 years, that's going to be a $40 million cost. And if folks aren't thinking about that ahead of time, the day the vendor says they're turning off the T1s, you're suddenly faced with an emergency rather than something that you can build into a longer-term plan.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. Travis, anything you want to add on financial models?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to add, and I should have mentioned it earlier, an investment in technology should always include, efficiency gains, right? And so then we need to be able to quantify what those efficiency gains are, because those are real dollars also that will offset some of the other costs. And so always ask that we make sure we capture what those, we think about what those efficiency gains are and put dollars to them. That way, when I'm going to the city manager and presenting a solution, we've got all the, the cost and actually what we'll gain by investing in this particular technology. Michael mentioned the chargeback model, and when I was at the city of Phoenix, that was an approach. And then here at Mesa, we don't do that. And so there's kind of pros and cons with both. With the chargeback model, we at City of Phoenix, you get into, well, I'm giving IT this many dollars, and so I expect this particular thing in return, or I'm not seeing a return on the money that I'm transferring over to you all. All right, so then you got to battle that. The approach here in Mesa, and Michael mentioned it earlier, is our relationships. And if you've got good, solid relationships with the departments across the organization, I think it's a lot easier to, manage in leveraging any of the models. So I just want to stress the importance of good, solid relationships across the business units.
Sure. And just the last thing I would add to that very briefly is that there are shiny objects. Remember a few years ago, everything was cloud first, and then it suddenly became cloud smart. It's extraordinarily important to look at these things, not only, as he said, from the efficiencies in a particular instance, but to avoid merely lifting and shifting a process, because in many cases the workflows and the processes that are available, the analytics that are available, are considerably improved and subject to consolidation. So there is additional efficiency to be gained there.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So a quick just reminder to the audience, if you have questions, feel free to share them here, and we'll get to a few of them in the last few minutes that we have left. I want to change gears just a little bit. We've been talking a lot about the financial side and the actual cost side, which of course we should, but it's also worth talking a little bit about the human dimension of this. Anytime we implement these systems and we bring about big organizational change, that comes with other kinds of costs. So I'm wondering if we could maybe ask you, Travis, to talk a little bit about, how your teams adapt to the pace of change, and what sorts of strategies can you think about with respect to the kind of human capital side for managing costs and better understanding total cost of ownership, taking better account for the fact that these are systems that are designed to, as Mike was saying before, solve problems that are understood by people doing the work.
Mm-hmm. So as far as adapting to the rapid pace of change, man, haven't we been faced with that this last year and a half with the COVID and being able to have to pivot to telework or with the CARES money, we had to pivot and stand up a system, and forms within a matter of weeks to be able to dole out CARES dollars to businesses and citizens that are in need and so this last year and a half has just been a sprint. Fortunately, we've created a culture here of innovation and always encouraged staff to think differently about how to approach solutions. We don't care about how things used to be done. We want to know how we need to do things and that. And so just creating that culture of innovation has made this this transition to the environment we're in now not so bad, because the team's used to pivoting and that. And so with regards to the total cost of ownership, again, when we discuss solutions, when I'm presented with solutions, I continually coach the team on considering all the costs and what are the long-term implications of doing certain things or investing in certain areas and that. And so my deputies, my assistants, they're all I've coached them enough now that we ask the right questions when we're faced with a solution that we need to, or with a problem that we need to marry a solution with, and that. And so I think that the teams are adapting well. They're used to pivoting, and we've designed our infrastructure so that we can be nimble and that, and we're leveraging virtual environments and that sort of thing to where we can switch gears quickly and be able to serve our citizens when and how they need to be served.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Mike, anything you want to add on?
Just very briefly, I'm sure Travis has done this too, but one of the things that became very obvious to me when I took this position was that although all humans are afraid of failure and looking foolish, folks in bureaucratic organizations that are used to doing things the same way for a long time are even more concerned. And so it's critical that you give folks the capacity to ask questions and not feel that their ignorance is somehow demeaning. And second, I encourage people to fail quickly. And by that, I don't mean we go out and try to fail, but rather, if something isn't going to work, I want to learn why it didn't work and apply it going forward.
Absolutely. Great answers. So maybe one question that has come up here, and maybe we can get this, it's a big question, but let's try to handle it in the little bit of time that we have left. The question is, we've talked about this a little bit already, but when you think about looking forward, understanding total cost of ownership, adapting your organizational cultures to better understanding and better managing total cost of ownership, what is it that you need from your teams and your partners to be able to continue to do that well? When you think about your needs for now and for the future to continue to do the kind of work that you're doing, what comes to mind right away? And maybe Travis, you have anything to add to that real quick, and then go to Mike.
Well, I was going to actually defer to Michael on that one, knowing that we've got a limited time.
Sure. Well, very briefly, I think the key to all of this, in terms of the internal team and the partners, both our vendor partners and our agency partners, is to get folks across the board thinking about the business value of using technology, both for automation and for analytics, and not thinking of it as the black box that no one understands. It's a tool, and it's critical that the folks using those tools are comfortable with them so they will actually use them. and that the people building them and managing them understand the needs of their customers.
Right. That's where the value of the business analysts come in, right? Because they get in and understand what's going on with the businesses and their needs or challenges and that, and we can align then a solution to whatever the challenge is that they're faced with, or we can partner with them. We're not telling them what the solution is. We're working with them to find a solution for their business problem.
Terrific. Well, I'm sure we could talk all day about this. It's obviously a large and very important topic, but I do want to be respectful of our time commitment here for today. So with that said, let's say thanks real quick to a few folks. First and foremost, thanks to Michael and Travis for taking the time to share your insights today. I really appreciate the chance to visit with you. Thank you very much.
You.
And I also want to take the chance to say thank you to our sponsors for today, Cisco Meraki, Fortinet, OpenText, and T-Mobile, for making it possible to have this important webcast discussion. And thanks to you, of course, our audience, for taking the time to spend the time with us here today. If you'd like to download your certificate of attendance, you can do so now by clicking on the certification icon at the bottom of the screen. Also, just a reminder, tune in with us on November 15th for our next conversation in this Future of Work series. And that conversation will be titled Funding GovTech, Shared Services, Shared Costs. So with that, thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.